job of providing all kinds of briefing materials. I told my staff today I was pleasantly surprised to see that they put briefing materials in there on this event that I didn't need to read, because this is something I've invested a lot of time in, and without notes, I go to the floor on a weekly basis to speak about Pastor Brunson, but not just about Pastor Brunson. I use him as an example of something that really heightened my awareness and my concern with what's going on in Turkey. But before I get to that, I should tell you I have some history with Turkey. When I was Speaker of the House in North Carolina, I led a delegation of House members to visit Turkey for some 9 days. We spent, maybe it was even a little bit more than that. Those were the 9 days in country, plus the travel days. And we spent a lot of time. I met with members of the parliament. I met with the mayor of Istanbul, the mayor of Kayseri, the mayor of Ankara, and I spent a fair amount of time with them. And then I also spent a fair amount of time with the Turkish Chamber of Commerce, with various. I toured several different facilities. And when I was asked if I had any special requests to add to the itinerary, I said I would like the opportunity to meet with the Ecumenical Patriarch, Bartholomew, if I could get that on the agenda. So I did meet with him. And I met with him for, he and the delegation. We met for maybe about an hour, hour and a half. What struck me about Turkey at that point in time, which would have been right around 2013, I think it was fall of 2013, was a sense of optimism in the country. A sense of growing economic strength, building ties with different countries, changing the way they do their supply chains, maybe a greater respect for religion and freedom of speech. That's at least the sense I got. And also at that time, happened to be invited as the speaker to join with 2 other congresspeople for what appear to be unacceptable results in Istanbul and Ankara. And the mayor of Kayseri, I should finish the follow-up on the meeting in Kayseri. I met with the mayor of Kayseri. He invited us to a mosque. It was Friday afternoon. He invited us to a mosque to observe prayers in the early afternoon. I guess it would have been around 1 o'clock Kayseri time. And we developed a relationship that actually resulted in his traveling and bringing a delegation to North Carolina so that once again we could continue the dialogue on how could our state, the 10th largest state in the United States, a very large economy, how maybe we could build relationships as the broader relationships with the United States would flourish. Now fast forward, I leave and I become a U.S. Senator, and we had a case that we opened up on this man named Andrew Brunson sometime last year. And quite honestly, it was treated like casework. When you're in a Senate office, if you have a state of 10 million people, you have any number of casework, people with all kinds of immigration issues, any number of issues. So he was a case that quite honestly I didn't follow as closely as I wish that I had, until we started reviewing the case in more detail when we saw this was serious. This was becoming very serious, and his detention was extended. He was arrested on October the 4th of 2016. His wife, Noreen, was as well. She was held for 12 days. During the coup, I don't want to be too specific, but I think there was that one or both of them were in the country when the coup occurred. And then there was a time that they traveled back to North Carolina for some visits here. And after the coup occurred, when the emergency powers were put into place and people were being arrested by the thousands, they made the choice to go back to Turkey. In fact, they were in the process of applying for some sort of permanent status in Turkey, which gave you a sense of how the 20 years that they'd been in Turkey, they'd connected to the Turkish people and Turkish culture and wanted to be a part of it. And so they traveled back. And then they're asked to come down to what they thought was a discussion about that permanent residence certificate, and they were put into jail. And Pastor Brunson hasn't been released since then. And he spent nearly 17 months in He spent nearly 17 months in a prison cell that was designed for 8 people that had 21 in it. And then they transferred him to Bucha, where he shares a cell with one other person. He spent 17 months without being charged. If we have a first-year law student in the room, what are the chances of you being held for 24 hours in a U.S. jail if there aren't formal charges? But here was over 17 months. Well, then I heard about, after the indictment, a 62-page indictment, which should go on Wikipedia as a reference to the sort of indictment that you would have in a kangaroo court. I heard through family channels that he was concerned that the American people were going to read this indictment and believe it and turn their backs on it. So that's when I told my MLA and others, I said, I've got to travel to Turkey. I want to look this man in the eye, and I want to tell him I will never forget about him, or the others who are subject to the same injustices. So I traveled to the prison, to Bucha, outside of Izmir, and I spent about an hour and a half with them. To the prison administration's credit, they gave us as much time as we wanted. Oftentimes you get about 59 minutes and you're done. But I went away just galvanized in my belief that this man is being illegally and unjustly detained. And then we had a court hearing, so I went back. I requested about 3 weeks later. I went back. Those of you who go to Turkey know that a 1 or 2 day trip in Turkey is, well, let's just say challenging. But not near as challenging as what Pastor Brunson's going through. So I went back. The court started outside of the prison complex at about 9, and it finished about 9 a.m., and it finished about 10 p.m. And what I saw in that courtroom was just absurd. The secret witnesses, the allegations that somehow a family member who happens to enjoy a meal is somehow associated with a meal that was found in some other purported crime scene that was a favorite meal of the wilderness movement is a basis for a 35-year sentence. Or a secret witness that talks about they observed a light in the room of this small church in Izmir. It's only got about 3 distinct rooms in it. Most of the downstairs is the chapel. They have 2 upstairs. One's used for administrative files and guitars, pianos. The other one is just an open room. It looks like they put chairs and tables in it for storage. But apparently some secret witness saw a light on it in this church for 4 hours one night. And clearly there could have been nothing but nefarious activity. 2 problems with that. In our country, having a light on doesn't necessarily suggest you're doing something wrong. The other problem with that is this room doesn't have a window. It doesn't have a window. So I could go on and talk about the other charges. I could talk about the fact that the prosecution actually put forth a document that says that churches in America are somehow woven together so that they can go to other countries and disrupt and overthrow governments. That they're kind of an intelligence gathering resource. This is serious allegations put forth by the prosecution. And I don't think I'm embellishing anything. These are the facts. Now, what makes me sad about this is we're talking about a NATO ally that we've had since 1952. And by and large, we have our differences in NATO. You know, it's like brothers and sisters. Any of you have brothers and sisters, you fought with them at times. But at the end of the day, you come together and support the family, right? So the family of nations of NATO generally do not treat the citizens of other nations in the manner that Pastor Brunson's being treated. Or for that matter, any number of people, the people who work with the State Department over there, who are Turkish nationals, those who have dual citizenship. A NASA scientist who's been sentenced to 7.5 years. He's been in for 1.5 years and now he's on appeal. It's not how you treat a NATO ally. It's not how you treat a nation who, by treaty, is committed to protecting you should a foreign power ever come onto your soil. That's a treaty that puts our men and women at risk, willing to lay down and die for the Turkish people if their sovereignty is threatened. This is not how you treat a member of that family. But that's how we're being treated. And I'm not a NATO historian, but I'm pretty damn sure it's the first time in the history of NATO that any nation has done this. Now, I have to tell you, every time I try to do this speech, I promise my wife and I promise myself I'm not going to get angry over the course of this speech. But quite honestly, I've failed every single time that I've talked about this because it's so frustrating and it's so salty. The fact of the matter is Turkey is a very complicated region. The area of Turkey, the region Turkey's in, is very complicated. And Turkey itself has a lot of complexities in it. They have the complexity of Syrian refugees. They have the complexity of their own homeland security. They have the complexity of legitimate terrorist I shouldn't say legitimate, but terrorist organizations who are threatening their sovereignty. I understand all that. So as a NATO ally, I'd like to be having a constructive discussion about how we protect the Turkish people, how we protect their sovereignty, how we actually make sure that foreign aggressors have no chance of ever destabilizing Turkey. But we're not at that point right now. What I'm confronted with as a member of the co-lead of the Senate NATO Observer Group, and I'm the chair of the Personnel Subcommittee on Senate Armed Services. I'd love to be talking about how we're strengthening our alliance, how we're making sure that they are protected from any sort of aggressor, either terrorist or other nation. But I can't have that discussion in this cycle in the National Defense Authorization Act. I'm going to have to pursue amendments, and I'm going to have to pursue measures that have a consequence for treating a NATO ally citizens this way. I have no choice. And I'm working very hard. This is my third speech today on this subject, on Capitol Hill, to really educate members why this is important. And then we can get on to the reality that if we are able to get Pastor Brunson released, that's very important. But there's so many other people that we need to be concerned with. And the president and the Turkish leadership absolutely have a right to have a peaceful transition of government. Anyone involved in the coup attempt should be ashamed of themselves. A democratized nation, a nation that I want to be in, is a nation that develops a history of peaceful transitions of power. So to those who supported the coup, I'm not with you. I don't think it was appropriate. And for those who are absolutely, based on factual data, guilty of doing something that is against Turkish law, they have to go to prison. That's the reality of having a stable government and ensuring a peaceful transition of power. As frustrating as it may be for some who want to change things quickly, I respectfully disagree. And I hope at some point I could come before you and we could be talking about the impact that they've had on freedom of speech in Turkey, the impact that they've had on Turkey's relationships with its NATO allies is history. That we're back on a positive trajectory, that we're back to the Turkey that I visited where there's optimism, that was legitimate free press, that we're normalizing our relationships, that we're taking care of human rights abuses, that we're releasing people who should have never spent a night in jail, so that the next time that I go to a Senate Armed Services hearing, or the next time I operate in my capacity as a Senate NATO Observer Group co-lead, that it's a positive discussion about the future of the relationship of the United States and Turkey. I really hope that happens, and I'd rather it happen sooner than later. But until now, we have to have forums like this so people really understand what's at stake in Turkey. And thank you all for the work that you've done. And I'm sorry for some of the personal experiences that you're going through. But, you know, not for the time being, but for the long term, you've got an ally in the Senate that has some insight into it, and I make no apology for stating the concerns that I have today. So thank you all for being here. I look forward to hearing getting the testimony and the recommendations on what more we can do. And please continue to follow what we're doing and provide us feedback, because this is very, very critical. It's important to the Turkish people, who are good people. It's important to the future of a nation that should be a great ally and a member of the family of NATO allies. Thank you all. Thank you. Have a great discussion, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.